everybody, this is Machi. I just wanted to talk about something that interested me in particular because I'm super into Elden Ring right now, and I have been deep diving into the lore for quite a bit since I started, or even before I started playing Elden Ring. And there is one theory that I've presented to the many people in the lore section of the Elden Ring Discord, and I think I've pretty much touched all my bases about this particular theory, and I think it really holds water. Although again, because it's a theory, it's not, there's no one answer to certain parts of Elden Ring, and I think this is just one of many answers, and for sure there are many possibilities to this one, so I'm not going to say that this theory is 100% accurate, but I do think it is very convincing. So we will start with the theory itself, which is, I think that Mohg and Miquella, and if you know anything about Elden Ring, just a quick rundown, Mohg kidnapped Miquella to become his consort. It's a whole thing. But the theory is that despite everything that happened in the Shattering and beyond, I do think that Mohg and Miquella actually did work together before the Shattering, before the kidnapping. And I think a lot of in-game lore, a lot of in-game information backs that theory quite a bit. So we'll start with Mohg and Miquella and their actual relationship, which is that they are half-brothers, or quarter brothers. Like, Miquella doesn't have he does have a dad, but his dad is his mom, so, anyway. They're related. Let's just say that. They're related, they are brothers, and Mohg intends to become his consort, so that's already pretty big red flag, not even talking about the kidnapping. And a lot of people have actually speculated that the kidnapping was part of Miquella's plan, but I don't necessarily agree. I don't think that makes sense in terms of what Miquella seemed to want. Although I will just do a quick rundown. There's a theory that Miquella is very similar to a character in Berserk called Griffith. They believe that Miquella is actually secretly evil and that he intends to become this super powerful, God king. And I won't say it's unlikely, because there are certainly many things that inspire from soft games, and Berserk is definitely one of them, and it's certainly a possibility given the similarities between Miquella and the character Griffith, but I don't think that's the case at all, and I don't think that the kidnapping was part of Miquella's plan. I do think, however, that there is evidence that they might have worked together at one point, and this can be found in the item descriptions related to Miquella. The primary item I'll be bringing up is actually the Sacramental Bud. And the description of Sacramental Bud says, an immature bud containing fresh blood. Material used for crafting items. Believed to originate long ago from a strain of buds cultivated with youthful sacramental blood. Now, this one appears to refer to Miquella himself. A lot of things that refer to youthfulness and a lot of botanical imagery is associated with Miquella. Miquella was supposedly assigned the Rune of Abundance, and he was also very well known for his work with plants, with buds. The Sacramental Bud is one example. And another piece of information comes from the Haligtree Armour. So the Haligtree Armour actually reads as follows. Its left breast is emblazoned with the crest of the Haligtree. Though watered with Miquella's own blood since it was a sapling, the Haligtree ultimately failed to grow into an Erd tree. So we get from this that Miquella was using his own blood to water the Haligtree. That's how he was growing it. So even way before Mohg kidnaps him, we know that Miquella was basically experimenting with blood. He was using his own blood on many of his experiments, including the Haligtree, including the Sacramental Bud, and this goes even further because we can see in the description for the Bewitching branch, it is a tree branch blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. And the interesting thing about the Bewitching branch is that when you actually look at how it's crafted, it is crafted with two parts. One part is Miquella's lily, which is a delicate water lily of unalloyed gold that has started to fade and wilt. A flower signifying faith in the Haligtree, thought to be beloved by the Empyrean Miquella in his youth. And the other ingredient is in fact the Sacramental Bud. So what we can glean from this is that Miquella was using his own blood to craft the Bewitching branches. It seems that the ability to bewitch people comes from his blood. And we do know that the blood that both Miquella and Malenia have is very special. In Malenia's case, her blood carries the rot, but in Miquella's case, we're not 100% sure. We know that he remains young, that he cannot grow, and the inability to grow actually has strong associations with Miquella. You see it in the nascent butterfly, which is associated with Miquella, the fact that the nascent butterflies always seem to be young, that they just came out of the cocoon. You also see it with the sacramental bud, which is always a bud. It hasn't grown into fully a flower, which contains supposedly Miquella's blood. And we also actually see it in the Haligtree. The Haligtree has failed to grow as it was watered by Miquella's blood. And while there could be many reasons for that, part of the reason may be because Miquella himself failed to grow due to his curse. Now, we know that Miquella went into the Haligtree to break this curse and ultimately to break Malenia's curse, because everything that Miquella did, all of the things that he researched, appear to be in order to cure his sister of the rot, and that seems to have been his goal from the very beginning. And we know from Gowry, based on his description of Miquella's needle, that it is quote-unquote, the work of a true artisan, a meticulous, bold craftsman who grasps the essence of life. So Miquella, we know, was a very brilliant demigod. He was considered to be very skillful, to be an artisan, to be a genius. He is called a prodigy by Morgoth, and he was considered by Malenia herself to be the most fearsome Empyrean. So even though we never technically meet Miquella in the game, we hear about him from everybody else. We hear that he was this amazing, amazing person, that he was capable of many things, that he was a genius. In fact, he even designed many incantations under Golden Order fundamentalism before eventually abandoning it because it failed to answer the question of how to cure Malenia's rot. And given that description of Miquella, I do think it means that he would have looked for all avenues to cure Malenia's rot. I do think he would have gone to different people who had the knowledge that he didn't have in order to get all the answers. And who better to ask about cursed blood than the Lord of Blood himself? Now, at first, this was all the information I had until somebody actually helpfully pointed out to me a piece of evidence that actually leans towards this theory being true. And that is, in fact, the ghost in the consecrated Snowfield that you find near the portal that Mohg presumably used to kidnap Miquella from his sleep in the Haligtree. The reason that this ghost in particular is so interesting is that it actually refers to Mohg by name. And I think that's very unusual, because we know from different characters, including Gideon, the quote-unquote all-knowing, that people in general don't know that Mohg is the Lord of Blood. And so, by reputation, he is only known as Lord of Blood. Nobody really knows who he is. Similar to how people don't know that Morgoth is an omen, Mohg's identity is kept secret to a lot of people, to the public. And so for this random person who clearly comes from Elfell, or at least serves Miquella, to know that this is Mohg, not the Lord of Blood, but Mohg, must mean that he must have known Mohg before the kidnapping, before his more prominent identity as the Lord of Blood. And another thing that we don't find in Elfell, despite what we know about FromSoft and their fantastic ability to put a lot of details into the world building just by looking at the environment, is that there's not many signs, if any at all, of the carnage of somebody trying to fight their way out of Elfell. And I really don't think that was a mistake. I think you're meant to assume that Mohg was able to sneak Miquella out without people knowing, but I think you're also meant to assume that he took that portal in the Snowfields to bring him to Mohgwyn Palace. But that being said, you have to wonder, was Mohg really not noticed? Or was he noticed and did people just assume he wasn't there to harm Miquella? Because we do know that Miquella welcomed everybody, and there's no reason he would have not welcomed Mohg into the Haligtree if he would welcome people who were considered lowly or hated by others, including misbegotten, Albinorix, etc. Like, Miquella was known for welcoming many peoples, and he probably would have had a good relationship with his siblings, who aligned with his ideals, and the siblings who actually believe in him include Malenia and Mohg himself. And since we know that Miquella had been doing a lot of blood experimentation, if he wasn't working with Mohg, in the very least, this probably is how Mohg came to know of him in the first place. And we do have to note that Mohg seemed to have enough familiarity with Miquella's plans and process to grow into a new god to attempt to replicate it in the Mohgwyn Palace. And despite knowing about Miquella embedding himself into the tree, Gideon, the quote-unquote all-knowing, still says that Miquella is a mystery to him. So Miquella's abilities and his plans appear to be very secret, though Mohg seems to know quite a bit about him, enough to know how to get him out of the Haligtree and have him survive, and still grow him inside the cocoon in Mohgwyn Palace. Even if Miquella looks very emaciated, even if he looks pretty much dead, we know from Gideon Ofnir and other hints that Miquella is in fact still slumbering. Not only that, we see that Miquella has grown into an adult form, which is very interesting because presumably if Mohg didn't know about his process, he would not have been able to grow Miquella into adult form. That would have been very difficult. Miquella's curse prevents him from growing, and yet Mohg has somehow circumvented this and caused Miquella to grow, which we can see because Gideon himself says that somebody absconded with Miquella's infant form, quote-unquote, and we can see in the opening that Miquella looks still like a child when Mohg takes him, but by the time we see him in the palace, he does fully look like an adult. Not just an adult, he looks like this gigantic, corpse-like figure that kind of resembles Morgoth when he's about to die. So, even in the process of ruining Miquella's plans, or so we assume, Mohg was able to break his curse, or Miquella was able to naturally break his own curse despite being displaced from the Haligtree. And while this could have just been an accident on Mohg's part, I think it actually points to the idea that Mohg may know of Miquella's plans and how he chose to cultivate himself in a tree that he watered with his own blood in order to grow into full godhood. I think Mohg had even a very personal or intimate knowledge of what Miquella was trying to do and was trying to use it to his own ends. But I do think that there are signs that he and Miquella had been working together, or in the very least that Mohg was in a position to have this much knowledge about Miquella's growing practices to be able to replicate it in Mohgwyn Palace. Now, to reiterate, I don't think that the kidnapping was part of Miquella's plot. I do think that Mohg was acting completely against his will in this regard, and I don't really believe the theories that Miquella is actually orchestrating every single part of this interaction. But I do think there are a lot of signs in the lore, in the game, in the environment, that show that Miquella and Mohg likely interacted with each other before the kidnapping and before the shattering. So much so that there is an implied amount of access that Mohg had to Miquella in the roots of the Haligtree, that there was an implication that his appearance in the Haligtree would not have been unusual until someone figured out that he took Miquella. There is a lot of implication that a lot of Miquella's knowledge about growing the Haligtree and himself as a god within it was also known by Mohg. And I think a very important part in all of this is that we take for granted that many people wouldn't have known that Miquella was attempting to become a god, and that the paths to the Haligtree are so secret that it takes a long time for us to figure out a way to get there in the first place. And in the end, we don't know who knew that in his path to become a god in the first place, that Miquella had no consort that we know of. Mohg attempted to place himself as Miquella's consort, which means he would have known not only that Miquella was ascending in the first place, but that Miquella was absent a consort, which we know to be an incredibly important role in the structures of Elden Ring around being a god. Since it seems like every single god or god candidate that we have met needs a consort in some manner, and that their consorts fulfill very important roles in the world. So yeah, that's my theory. I think that Mohg being welcome at the Haligtree was a very strong possibility. I think that Miquella's experimentation with blood may have called upon Mohg in the first place, or he may have worked with Mohg in some way. And I also think that if this is true, it would explain, Mohg just growing feelings. Like, obviously a lot of people assume that either Mohg was bewitched, or Mohg is just obsessed without ever knowing Miquella, or that even the Formless Mother had something to do with it. But we also can't discount the possibility that he just knew Miquella, that they actually did spend time together, and that's how he fell in love. And while ultimately I don't think it really changes anything in the current world of Elden Ring, I just think it's interesting. I just think these characters are interesting. I just think it's very interesting to think about Miquella in the time before the Shattering, in the time before he went into the cocoon, and in the time before he was kidnapped. I just think it's very intriguing that both characters are so important and present to the lore, even if you don't necessarily meet one and the other remains an optional boss that you could actually miss in the game. And like a lot of Elden Ring fans, I do want to see more Miquella DLC. I didn't even go into the fact that he is also Saint Trina, or at least based on cut content, but also just based on existing lore in the game, that he's definitely Saint Trina. And that adds a huge layer to the fact that Gideon Ofnir, the quote-unquote all-knowing, refers to Miquella as slumbering inside his egg. And we know that Miquella has been growing inside that egg. We know that somehow Mohg has achieved at least helping Miquella break his curse. And that according to Vare, Mohg has been slumbering beside him this whole time. So we still haven't even scratched the surface of there being the possibility of a dream in Miquella's mind, as there was with Godwyn, and Mohg possibly even being in that dream or attempting to enter it. So all that being said, I just wanted to present this theory. I just really like these characters. I think they're neat. And yeah, Muchie out.